without a way to align incentives and fund innovation in the public sector, there's going to be this growing chasm where it's going to be harder and harder and harder for innovators to access the public sector.
You don't need talent density if you're not scaling your company. What you need to get to product market fit is radical focus, and you need to be around other founders that are in your exact stage who can push you and challenge you.
All right, y'all, welcome back to another episode of Ever to Conquer. I am incredibly excited about today's episode. I know most of you know me as a very scripted and disciplined, filtered individual, but today I'm gonna kind of break that mold. And I have somebody with us today that is not only a really good friend, but also has a really cool story and some insights to share. So Cam Doody is a general partner at Brickyard, a new take on the VC world that I'm obsessed with. Cam, thank you for taking time out of what you do. I can't thank you enough for this. I'm incredibly excited to see where this goes in like all the dangerous ways that are, I think, good.
I mean, when you called me and you said, "Hey, we should rip a podcast," we catch up pretty often, but normally when we talk, we end up talking for like an hour or more, and it's always so interesting, and so hopefully we can get into some of the dirt and the real gritty stuff that you and I really want to talk about anyway.
I think like the joke has always been, what if people could hear our conversations? And here we go.
Yeah, let's go. I'm really excited.
So tell the folks who Cam Doody is from a professional perspective, right? We've known each other a long time. I think you've got a really cool story, both in like kind of how it started and then also where it went.
Yeah, I mean, so Jamie and I, for you guys, we went to school at Auburn together, War Eagle. And we, when I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew whatever it was, I tend to hyper-focus on things and get like super deep into whatever I'm doing. And I graduated right in the middle of the financial crisis, and the economy was just like flat. I mean, it was just, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, it was such a weird time. And so I had, big ambitions through college about what I wanted to do. I actually worked for a defense contractor through college. I thought that I was going to Afghanistan for like 2 or 3 years on a project. That ended up falling through, with a trade secrets lawsuit, and like in two weeks before I graduated school. And so I graduated, and I was like, I have no idea what to do, and nobody was hiring. My brother-in-law was like, I can get you a job at a bank. And I was like, I'll take it. I've got to do something. And so I ended up going and working in banking. When I say that to folks in venture or whatever, like, oh, okay, which banks you in? Was it Goldman? It's like, no, I worked in a bank in a mall parking lot in a bank branch. I was repinning people's debit cards. And that time, not to throw shade on retail banking, but it was just I knew I wanted to do more. And it was really scary to me to see a career of like, okay, this is a 40-year grind in a 50 or 60,000 person, multinational retail bank. And it was weird to see where I would be in 10 years if I just climbed this corporate ladder. In fact, it was terrifying to me. And so I put a year in there. I had a great time. There's amazing people that I worked with. But I stayed just long enough until, I could have like a full year on my resume. And then I went into medical equipment, and I had a lot more autonomy. And, I got to play into the sales side a good bit. It's for a startup medical equipment company where I got to launch a new market. And that was really interesting and invigorating for me to be able to have a lot of agency in my job. But pretty quickly, I knew that my goal has always been time independence. So, if I were to be able to wake up every day and live life on my terms, and I have some pretty wonky terms. Um, I have to take this thing really seriously, and I have to, I have to start something of my own. And so one of my best friends and I started thinking about starting a company, which we started meeting, every week or two, trying to come up with an idea. And after about a year of this, it was like, okay, we just have to pick something and go. And the best idea that we had at the time was, it's a real pain to move in college, and nobody really hires moving companies, but you've got like tens of thousands of broke athletic college students that are capable. Could you connect them with an iPhone, and match them with jobs for other students that were moving and facilitate payments and stuff? And this was like before Uber. We didn't even really know what Uber was, but we knew that we could
give the timeline for this, because you were early in the tech-enabled services game.
Yeah, this was 2011 when we started the company, and so this was like, very, very early on. But we knew that we could build on the platform, and we could coordinate a large workforce with, because these college kids just had smartphones in their pockets. And so we started moving college students into dorms, and we were like, we're going to be huge. We're going to go to every college. We're going to go, we're going to move every kid into college dorms. There's 2,500 four-year universities in the States. We're going to be at every one. We get through the first year. We were hoping to move like 20 kids in. We ended up having to move 400 and something kids in 3 days. We were knocking on fraternity house doors, begging kids. We had to hire 90 kids to actually do this because they were all smushed into the same, 2 or 3 day period. And we get through it, and we made a bunch of money, and we were like, oh yeah, this is going to be like shooting, fish in a barrel. We're going to do this everywhere. And then so the next year, this was 2012, we ended up going to 8 schools in the Southeast. And it was just so clear, you can't build a business on 2 or 3 days. I mean, it was just a madhouse. And but luckily around that time, the parents of the kids started asking us like, hey, like, we loved your Bellhops. Can you load or unload our U-Hauls? And we were like, no, we only move students, whatever. We turned down our first, 100 requests for that until finally we were like, okay, let's just try it. And so we started moving non-students, and then that became, 95+% of the business in like a year or two. And that flattened out the curve a little bit more. And we decided to raise venture capital in late 2012, and then we started scaling the company. And then, so this company is called Bellhops, and so we were a labor-only moving platform with some really great tech on how we, matched customers with Bellhops. But our customers were like, we don't want to have to pick up the U-Haul. Can you pick up the U-Haul? And we were like, no, we can't do that, whatever. 50 more requests later, we were like, all right, let's try it. And then, within about 5 months, we became like a top 10 customer of U-Haul. And so what we were doing was we were booking a truck, and we'd book a move, and then we'd go and book a U-Haul on a corporate account, and then the captain of the move would go pick up the truck, bring the truck back, and we're building a moving company without any of the licensing, but we were operating a full service moving company. At this time we were in like 47 cities, and so we started getting cease and desist from every municipality, and we're just tossing them in the trash, whatever. And then we got served, and it was like, okay, we've got to figure out, and the company just kept growing, and we were operating a full-service moving company in a bunch of different cities, and everything was growing really nicely. And then U-Haul decided that they were going to shut down our corporate account because they had a labor-only product that we were like cannibalizing. And so they basically changed their policy, and they killed our corporate account. And we had like 2,500 trucks that were booked for like the month of July in 2015. That we had 2,500 moves that had been booked that we were having to execute over the next month, and we don't have any trucks. And so randomly, I had met the best friend of Roger Penske. Hannon and I were in the Bahamas on like the first vacation that I'd taken forever, and met this guy, and I ended up calling this guy. I was like, I need to talk to Roger Penske like right now, because if we've got to book 2,500 trucks like now. And 2 days later, Penske's executive team flew in. We got all the stuff. So that, anyway, this pushed us down this path. We just kept, being hesitant about moving up market, going up market, dealing with new problems, doing it again. And now, Bellhops is the third or fourth biggest local and regional in long distance, centralized, aka non-franchise moving company in the U.S. So we're moving. We've moved about 500,000 U.S. households now, and we're doing everything from Miami to L.A. stuff, and we're still doing labor only stuff, but. Right before COVID, we sold part of the company into private equity, and I stepped out of the company at that time. I was fried. It was just such a hard.
Let me hang on. I want to stop you for a second. So you hit on so much gold there. If you were to try and describe hypergrowth to somebody that's never been through it, because you and I were going through it about the same time. In totally different businesses. How do you try and explain hypergrowth to somebody, and how could you even begin to write a playbook to prepare for it? Like if you look backwards and you go, I'm Cam Doody, you've never met a stranger, you've never met something you're scared of, like you are quintessential like co-founder gold to just like take. But now you look back and you go, could I have prepared for it? How would I prepare for it? How do you explain it to somebody? Because when somebody goes, hey, this is the first time Hannah and I took a vacation in a while, like everybody wants the hockey stick results, but what is that? How do you describe the absolute utter 24/7 chaos of going through hypergrowth?
That's actually a good way. So let me put it this way. If founders had a crystal ball, and you could actually see yourself ringing the NASDAQ in 10 years or 12 years, whatever. You're like, I know that we're going to win. Like, if you had that certainty, but then you had to go and watch everything that you had to do to get there, 99.999% of us, including me, would be like, screw this. I'm going back to the bank.
100%.
It's brutal. It's absolute. I say like delusional optimism is the only superpower of a founder. It's like you would never do this if you knew what it took.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're looking back, you're just talking about all the good times and stuff. But like in the middle of it, it is brutal. I mean, it is hardcore bad.
And what are like, so we joke, Amy, our COO at CareSync, like there were times where she was hitting submit in ADP, like saying a prayer, like you're having to hire so fast that you're like, I think we can make payroll, or I have 2,500 trucks that I need in 30 days. And like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I don't think enough people realize what the hyper growth phase, one of my favorites, and I forget who it's attributed to, but most organizations die of suicide, not by homicide. Like it's not external. They just quit or they walk away. That hyper growth phase to me is something super fascinating because I don't think you can plan for it. I don't think you can prepare for it. I don't think you can opt into it.
There's so many things that we could dial in here. Like one thing is, when you're in a hyper growth company, the worst part about all of it is, people grow at natural rates, and these companies that are experiencing hypergrowth are growing at unnatural rates.
Yeah.
And so you have, it's Groundhog Day over and over and over again of the best person in your company overnight becomes an anchor on the business at no personal fault to them. Like the company just outgrew them. And these are people that were your MVPs, like people that have been putting heroic effort into your company, and you're having to let them go. And it happens over and over and over and over again. And so I like to think, I like to look at it. The only people that really get a pass are the founders, because you are not, you know, to a degree, like your
I was
board
about
can
to say,
obviously get rid of you,
I was about to
but
say,
like,
yeah, keep
but
going.
yeah, but your board, your founders have a pass to a degree, right?
Yeah.
But in the day-to-day operations, managing the business and like hanging on to that, that ambulance that you got a hold of, right? Like you're just getting drugged down the road, and in the middle of that process, the founders. That's where a lot of this imposter syndrome comes from, because you start to build a company with people that are way more experienced and capable than you are, and somehow like you are just trying you're just trying to keep your head above water.
Yeah.
But anyway, the hypergrowth thing is it's like people say, how do you know you have product market fit? Like, what is product market fit? And it's like you know it when you see it, and that's the only that's the only way that it's just, you think that you have product. We have a lot of founders, and so they're like, I think we're on product market fit. I'm like, yeah,
It's cute. It's cute.
yeah, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But when it comes, it's like, oh my gosh, it's an overwhelming and challenging thing.
It's almost addictive, at least in my experience. Like because like even when you look at what the original thesis of Bellhops was, kind of like Uber, kind of like Airbnb, like any of the things that were kind of those first market entrants into let's disrupt the dinosaurs. Going back to, Netflix, Kodak, like all of these blockbusters, like the dinosaur and the predator, like moving was kind of fine before y'all. It wasn't, but right, like taxis were kind of fine before y'all, and that delusional optimism to go like, wait a minute, we don't have to settle for something that sucks, even if something that sucks is kind of working. How did you? The other thing I wanted to touch on that you went through is like, I think you both as a man and a friend, but also from what I've observed about you in the professional sense, you do listen to your customers. And I thought when you were talking about the requests that were coming in of like, hey, no, we only move students, to no, we can also move families, to no, we can do more. How would you advise, and how do you advise your companies on the balance of, because I think you and I agree on sales-led product market fit, right? Like get out of the castle, go get in front of customers and prospects,
Yep.
pitch and listen. But also like the tension of not reacting to the last request you had. Did you have a system or a process where you said, okay, now we've heard from enough credible prospects or customers, or was it kind of a feel to go, okay, we've had 100 or we've had 50? How do you coach companies on that?
Well, luckily, in startups, you have so many fires that are always burning that you're very busy. Like you're very busy in defense mode, right? Just you crack some new growth lever, your company starts growing, that creates new problems for your company, and so you start putting out fires here and there, and so operationally you're like drowning a bit because your company is growing, and then somebody shows up and says, hey, but if you did this, like I would definitely buy this more, or I would spend more money or whatever. The silver lining in this is that you're kind of preoccupied, and so you have to hear something like enough before you're like, okay, let's take the next step up on the asymptote,
Yep.
And so, but I think this does happen to every company. Airbnb is a perfect example. Brian Chesky tells a story. Airbnb, you know why Airbnb is called Airbnb?
I've heard this one. I know how they started, and I think
Well,
I have it right, but tell us.
it was airbed and breakfast. So when they
Yes.
started the company, it was like, hey, you rent an airbed in somebody's living room.
Yes.
Okay. And so we started doing that. And I'm just
Yeah. Yeah.
telling the story in his voice. So we started doing that. We started renting, they started renting their mattresses in the living room. And then he was like, we started having customers come to us and be like, hey, there's like a fully open bedroom in my apartment. I kind of feel weird making somebody sleep in the airbed in the living room. Can we like make them, can we just rent the room? And Brian was like, for the first like 20 customers, we're like, well, yeah, I guess you could do that, but you have to put the airbed on top of the bed. Okay. And so you get into these like little tunnel vision,
For sure.
periods of vision where you're like, yeah, but we could do that, but then like that makes like we named the company Airbed and Breakfast. And they're like, well, okay, I'm not even going to be in my apartment this whole weekend. Somebody just wants to rent the whole thing for the whole weekend. Can I do that? And they were like, well, how are you going to cook them breakfast in the morning? Right?
Yeah.
And so everybody goes through this. There's only so much you can uh, catalyze on in any one time, and you have these anchors that are constantly, that you're constantly having to like cut anchor lines,
Yep.
And the tunnel vision's good, but you also need to be able to cut. One of the best sayings in venture is have strong convictions, but hold on to them loosely.
Yes.
And that's probably the most defining characteristic of really great founders, because you have to be able to keep cutting those anchor lines.
I love
Um,
that. One of the things that there's certain just masterpieces, I think, in our industry or in just business leadership. One of my all-time favorites that kind of launched him was Simon Sinek's the Golden Circles.
yeah,
To your point, to like truly understand the why. And I think in my experience, when I've lost track of the why and I start thinking about the how or the what, I now care about the air mattress on top of the bed or cooking the breakfast rather than understanding like truly timelessly why our company exists, which then, the other thing you touched on that I think is really interesting, that is pervasive. And I got to live this on the legislative side, and it was a fascinating journey to be a borderline libertarian that hates government, to be in a state that was super majority Republican, to be running legislation to try and abolish the regulatory capture that was, preventing ride sharing or preventing the short-term vacation rentals, and this, the oligarchy or the big interest that's sitting there. Like my favorite on the vacation rental stuff was the hotel lobby showed up and they're like, dude, you can't let Airbnb or Vrbo just operate. You don't know if there's a sexual predator like in the next unit. And I'm like, I tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I've already drafted the amendment. You have to announce every time there's a sexual predator at the pool at your hotel. So if you want to make them like, let's just level set this field. And they pretty quickly walked away from it, but it's like they're willing to use kind of the hired gun to walk in and say like, it's not fair for a free market and private property rights to flourish because it'll attack our business. And so instead of being intellectually honest, they're like, well, they could have a sex predator in there. It's like, do you do a check-in of everybody that checks in at your hotel, a cross-reference whether or not there's a sexual predator there? I like the regulatory capture piece. And I don't know if you've seen Bill Gurley at the All In Summit a couple years ago, but it is a beautiful job of summarizing what I lived in the legislative front, where it's like, how am I having a hard time getting conservative Republicans to disrupt markets and go like, let's just let private property or vehicles actually engage in commerce with people.
I pitched Bill Gurley one time, by the way.
I want to meet Bill Gurley because here's the thing: the number of I actually have it. I will prove this to you in the world at some point. I was going out to the Valley that we would do like a group of, it was kind of an association led thing where it was like legislative leaders from across the country, like 10, 20 of us that were really focused on tech friendly policy, free enterprise. And I was flying from San Francisco back to DC. And I remember thinking that the geographical distance, and I have it in a little moleskin, the geographical distance between DC and San Francisco is smaller than the metaphorical divide between the innovation community and regulatory capture.
Oh yeah.
And he titled that speech, the number of miles. It's like 2817 or something. I forget what it is. But the other thing that was crazy is he used Epic, the EMR company, and the regulatory capture that happened there, who Epic was trying to kill us while we were a nobody trying to build the patient side of healthcare. So big plug for people who don't know regulatory capture. Tell us, I said this was going anywhere. You pitched Bill Gurley when you were at Bellhops?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what happened?
Oh my gosh. It was, I've pitched probably 1,000 VCs at this point, over the last decade. But there's a few that just totally, you'll never forget. I remember, how I felt going into that meeting. I mean,
he had already, real quick, to level set, he's already early Uber at this point. Like he is.
Yeah, this was 2018.
Okay. So for our audience, and real quick, Cam, we have a total array. Like, give us tell people why you were nervous. Because you and I both would. Why Bill Gurley? Who is he? In general, and then specific to Bellhops,
yeah, Bill Gurley is like the Emperor in Star Wars. So Bill Gurley runs a venture firm called Benchmark, and they're one of the top performing venture investors of all time, and they don't have one of these like massive funds. Like it's not like you go into Andreessen Horowitz and there's like 100 partners and you're in like a big business park, and this is Benchmark Capital is I think it's 5 partners total. And
I didn't know they were that small. That's cool.
And they don't have any analysts. There's no layers in the business. It's just the partners. And it's in like an unnamed, building. And I think I had just watched that Succession. I think I'm remembering this right. Like maybe Succession wasn't around in 2018. I think it was. But you remember when Kendall was like, he was like getting hyped up to go into like some meeting or something. He was trying to look cool and he was like blaring like Rage Against the Machine in his headphones.
Yes.
I mean, I was like in an Uber on the way to this pitch. I was like, I'm going to murder this pitch. I mean, I was so dialed in. I mean, I walked in, we get into this room, whatever. And Bill Gurley, if you don't know, he's like 7 feet tall.
I was about to say, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if he's tall. He's like
6'10", 6'8". It's something.
Yeah. So he comes in, he's got this super deep voice. He's from Austin, Texas. And he sits down and like normally, you go through your like pleasantries or whatever, and then you like get into the pitch or whatever. And so he sits down, he like kind of sits down like this, and he's like, okay, what are we doing here? And I was like, we're Bellhops, raising our Series C. Would you like me to get into the deck here? And he's like, yeah, let's do that. And so I'm like clicking through the first slide, get to like the SEO slide, and I was like, rattling off, metrics, whatever. And he's like, why don't we just go to Google? Let's see how you actually pull up. And I was like, yeah, okay. So it was everything that he could do to throw you off. He was doing in the most nonchalant way. And we get like 3/4 of the way through the deck, and he just kind of stands up. And he's just like, okay, cool. Well, it's good to meet you guys. Jenny, you can, okay. And he just walks out of the room. Like I wasn't even fully through the deck.
And did they follow up?
No. It was one of our investors had made, Bill invest in these like really high impact, like super sexy, super current companies, like a moving company. I'm sure he was walking into this meeting. He took it, one of our investors like pulled like a Hail Mary like favor to get in front of him, and and I think he knew the whole time he was just kind of doing it for a favor, but it was an experience. It was a good
awesome.
time.
So let's transition to Brickyard. So kind of setting the stage. You have a exit of some sort, right? Where you get the liquidity event. You step out. First question, the build, just like the question of hypergrowth, and I have unfortunately or fortunately not experienced it. I actually kind of like for what we're building now that I have not had the successful exit. I've had like the catastrophic ending, which was an amazing experience. Painful, but amazing. What is that like to go through? Like, you've gone through hypergrowth, you've been in chaos mode, you've gone through all of that. You're now kind of like talking about a liquidity event, and then the liquidity event happens, and then you look at your bank account.
This is hard to describe. I'll tell a quick story. So back in 2012, when we had moved to Chattanooga at Lamppost Group, the three founders of Lamppost were three entrepreneurs, started a company called Access American Transport. They sold the company in 2013 when we were housed out of Lamppost. And they had become like our very close friends. And they, we were at the very beginning of our journey, and they were at the end. And they had this moment where they got bought. They had raised no venture capital, and they got bought for about $500 million. And so there was no, it was a huge outcome for these three best friends. And they brought us into the room, and they wanted us to like actually see it happen. And so we're like kind of sitting back, and they're just sitting there hitting refresh on their screen. And all of a sudden, like, dink, like one of these guys just kind of slumps back in his chair, and he kind of puts his head down like that. And it was a look of loss.
Keep going. Keep going. This is what I thought your answer was going to be. Keep going.
And I'm obviously super excitable. So I'm like, Barry, oh, guys, what? This is like, holy crap. I was like, surely this is the best day of your entire life. Like, you just did what I'm about to dedicate a decade of my life to hopefully do. With absolutely no guarantee, and it probably almost certainly won't happen, right? And it's like, he looks up and he's like, it's not the best day of our life. And it was kind of somber, and they sort of just filtered out of the room, and that was it. And so in 2019, when we stepped out of Bellhops, it was a very similar feeling. Like, it was just you spend all this time building something. It's very similar to raising a child, and it's not natural to just move on. It's like it's just weird. And I didn't understand that in 2012, and I couldn't even wrap my head around that until we experienced something similar. And so that's probably how I would describe it.
All right. So then because I mean, kind of, when we had what happened to our company, it was like the loss without the bank account, right? Like, I mean, I literally lost all common stock in something we built for 8 years. And fortunately, the papers didn't really realize it, but they're dunking on me every day. I went broke, like, in public. I had my house. I had my $29,000 legislative salary for a part-time job, and I had just lost, 8 figures of worth on paper. And it's like, you can't get back into the company. We've got 325 employees that are looking for a job. I don't think people realize the attachment that develops. And I would never equate it to kids. Not a dad, hopefully will be, but like, I don't want to, I can't even imagine, right, that attachment. But there is a second tier level of attachment. and a family-like bond that you realize. And I think team sports really help with this. Like, there's that moment when you're a senior that you're like, this locker room will never be together again.
Yeah.
But when when you've co-founded something and built something with people that you have gone, like the hyper growth phase of like who's in the foxhole, who's in the trenches, that builds a level of bond that I don't think people that haven't gone through something similar can relate to, which I thought was going to be your answer. So you go through that period. How does Brickyard start? What is Brickyards? Introduce Brickyards from a why Chattanooga perspective. Like, I think there's something cool there.
Yep.
Like why did you pick Chattanooga? And then what is Brickyards? And then we'll pull some threads on that. And then I want to get to kind of like where you see the landscape. Because I think, let's start there.
Well, so the group that wrote our first check in a Bellhops called Lamppost Group, and it wasn't an accelerator, it wasn't an incubator, there was no demo day, it was not, all it was a venture firm, but if they wrote a check into you, you came and built in their building. And we did that alongside 10 other companies over like a 4 or 5 year period. And it was magic. It was like 7 of those 10 companies are really big, super successful companies. And we all started, in the same second floor of the Lovemans building, downtown Chattanooga. And, there was something very special about the competition and the extended exposure to these other founders as they went through their trough of sorrow and ultimately, hit product market fit. Like the bonds that you created outside of like, a lot of the accelerators today, like Y Combinator, which is amazing. That's a 10-week boot camp functionally.
Yeah.
Right. But when you spend a year or 2 years or 3 years alongside, others that are operating under the same pressures that you are, and you're experiencing their highs and their lows, and it's just a very different thing. And so we knew this whole time, when we came up for air and we were all free agents again, whenever that would be, we were going to do Lamppost again. And so that's what Brickyard was. So when Matt and I stepped out of Bellhops right before COVID, we took about a year off, and then believe me, like sitting on a beach and, waking up at, 8 a.m. on a Tuesday and kind of mulling around the house until a 10 a.m. yoga class. It's not all it's cracked up to be. All right. It's very, it's a terrible feeling. And so
first of all, for anybody that knows Cam Doody, thinking that you could do that for 2 weeks, let alone a year.
Yeah. It was
stir crazy,
not,
maddening.
And of course, like I got into like a million things like over that, but I was just squirreling around. It was super fun. And I got into a bunch of really, exciting, side quests, but like I wanted that depth. Like I wanted to be back in the trenches. And so we all came back together as a group, and we bought a building on the south side of Chattanooga, which is this amazing old Persian rug warehouse. We turned it into exactly what we wanted ourselves. And we basically took the playbook of Lamppost, which we really understood from the operator side.
Yep.
And we ran it back. But we didn't know, this was 2021, 22, during like this bubble and mania and venture capital. We didn't know if we could attract top 0.1% founders to functionally the middle of nowhere in Chattanooga, like totally away from these established tech hubs. But we knew that actually building in this environment is accretive to early stage teams, because you don't need talent density if you're not scaling your company, right? What you need to get to product market fit is radical focus, and you need to be around other founders that are in your exact stage who can push you and challenge you, and you can have tactical discussions about how you're solving problems and things. And so we're a traditional venture capital firm. We write, $300,000 to $600,000 checks into pre-seed and seed stage technology companies all over the world. And if you take a check from us, you're basically buying into our style of building, which is put the blinders on, and completely lock in until you get to 1 million in run rate at a minimum. And so we naturally attract a very specific type of founder, which are like kind of your like junkyard dogs. Like they're not in venture capital because they're putting it on their resume that they raised money from Andreessen Horowitz, and they're not going after Forbes 30 under 30, and they're not doing the parties and the events and all the other BS that comes with venture. These are just serious startup operators that have a company that they're sort of neurotic about solving, and they want to put themselves in an environment where they can just lock in. Yeah. And that's hard to fake. And we're like in this world today where there's way more materials out there on how do you build a deck and what metrics do you talk about and like what words are you saying, and when you're talking to investors. And it's like Rolexes in the 80s. It's like the fakes are getting really good,
Yeah.
And when you're a pre-seed or seed stage investor, you're just looking for the fakes as like a first order of business. And so we said, all right, maybe the best thing that we could do is build this highly inconvenient, totally unorthodox thing where we actually attract a very specific type of founder that doesn't fall into, that category of, the folks that are in it for the wrong reasons. And it's been a major edge for us. And so, yeah, we've backed 44 companies now over the last 3 years. Teams come here for about 2 years at a time. And, they're in Brickyard 90, 100 hours a week. And it's a blast, and it's a ton of work, and it's an execution house. And we think that that's really what was missing in venture. And so we've really carved off a pretty unique edge in the space, where we're able to continue to invest in a very specific type of founder over and over and over again.
So you keep throwing out just like gold. I think we could do another episode on depth in general. I'm convinced that there is a crisis societally, and I mean in friendships, marriages, businesses, like the lack of depth in our generation and in this country, I think has all of these different symptoms. And I think at some point we all understand that there is the choice between breadth and depth. Like at some point, time is linear, and we have to be a broad-based business person, whatever it may be, or a deep person. And as you kept going, Cam, one of the things that I think, and I don't know if y'all have ever talked about this as a team, but having been on the operator side of venture, not on the general partner, limited partner side, one of the things that scares me about raising venture again, if I ever did it, is does my board, do the investors actually understand our business?
Yeah.
And y'all made a bet that I loved, the painting or the lithograph, whatever it is, when you did the unveil of Burn the Ships. I was like, it's middle of COVID. You have everybody trying to celebrate remote work. You are literally going with your personal money where everybody is not going, right? Like you are taking this position that says like, we have to kowtow to remote work, and we have to give these entitled folks what they want. And y'all said, no, you come here to burn the ships. You come here to be here. We'll be in the trenches with you. I wonder how much there's an alignment and how much like risk mitigation or risk management you as a general partner are doing by also being at Brickyard with them to actually understand their business in a way that I think would be difficult in traditional venture.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like two things at play here. Number one, these companies change week to week in the early days.
Yes.
And so even if you underwrite a company, it's almost certainly like 100% different than what you underwrote even like a quarter later, right?
Yeah.
If it's a good team. Like, sometimes you make investments in teams that like kind of really dialed into exactly what they, what their go-to-market motion was or whatever. But that's pretty rare. Like normally your best founders are like reaching these false summits, and they're not wasting any time at the top, and they're sprinting back down, and they're scaling another one. And 2 months after investment, they're doing something totally different than that doesn't even make sense for your for your LP memo that you wrote about why you invested. So that's one thing, and it's really difficult to stay on top of that when let's say you've made 30 or 50 investments in a bunch of really early stage companies, and all you're getting are like monthly or quarterly updates.
You're doing a QBR to learn where they are, right? Like,
yeah, and so being around these teams, like we don't have standing meetings, although we're constantly getting pulled into rooms. Like we've got this problem. How do we solve this problem? And it's not like we have all the answers. We just are founders, and so it's a bunch of founders in one place, and we're all kind of trying to solve each other's problems, from day to day or whatever.
My question to you real quick, because you had a second one. Not my question. My prediction is that when you get pulled into those war rooms, you're giving more questions to solve problems than answers.
Well, the truest thing that I can say about real founders is they will never, ever listen to what you tell them to do. It's almost certain.
It's got to be their idea. The Socratic method is timeless for a reason.
It is. You're absolutely right. And if you come in, super prescriptive, which is hard to, as any founder is, you're very opinionated. You have very, clear lens of one way that you see the world, et cetera. It's hard to not be prescriptive. Every time I've been prescriptive with a founder, like 100% hit rate, they've done the total opposite thing of what I've suggested. And so, yeah, you really do. You have to ask the right questions, and you have to get them to start asking the right questions.
So I want to touch on here for a second, because us as a company being 100% committed right now to like radically disrupting the go-to-market for public sector innovation, which is in desperate need. But part of our conversation that led to thinking like, hey, I know we're in like different places, so to speak, in the industry. You made what I think is your first investment in a technology company that is 100% focused on the public sector. I don't know if there's more than one, but I know of one that I've had a chance to kind of get to know a little bit. I'm curious if there's more. I'd love to. When you made the decision to back Prozl, how did you look at, let's step back for 1 second. What I try and tell people when we look at investment in the public sector is that traditional venture has problems in that the public sector business unit is going to be about 3 times as expensive on a cost per lead basis. The sales cycle is going to be twice as long. The customer acquisition cost is effectively criminal, but the lifetime value of a customer is elite, right? So if I compared commercial business to public sector business, CAC in the commercial space is way better, like faster growth, faster logo acquisition, lifetime value not as good, right?
Yeah.
Public sector is kind of the inverse. I want to do 2 things. One, I want to know why you took the bet on Prozl as a guy who has some adjacent experience to the public sector, but not necessarily in like winning public sector business. Why did you ultimately make a bet on them? And then let's dive into where you see kind of public sector policy and incentives and kind of this new frontier we're in going. Do you plan on doing more? Do you think there's I want to jam out for a second after that, so I'll quit rattling questions. Why did you make that bet? And do you see yourself making more bets on public sector technology companies?
Yeah, we have. Prozl is, we're very drawn to founders that are sort of just extraordinary people. And like that may come off like, of course, everybody's going to say, but when I say extraordinary, I mean like different, like just different people. Real founders are just different. You meet them and you're like, what was that? I don't know if it was good or bad, but it was something, and, the Prozl team fit this mold of, okay, they are viewing something from a completely different angle than most people. And, Nick, the CEO, is just, very smart, high IQ, very just driven person. We really loved what they were doing in the beginning, but this was one of those stories like what Prozil is today is not what we backed
Yeah.
in the beginning. In the beginning,
it's not even what you introduced them to me as.
I know, and that's how that's how these things go, and so yeah, when we backed Prozil, 95% of our decisioning is like, are these dogs? Are these dogs that are about to go to war for a decade, and they have the chops to do it, they have the drive to do it, they have a direction that is interesting to us, but like we don't have the ego of trying to speculate on like how the market is going to receive completely new technologies like AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I do know is that every extraordinary company that will be built by a neurotic person that's obsessed with what they're doing, that's working an insane amount of hours, that is totally committed to, building a really large company. Like that is investable at this stage.
Yeah.
And so that's why we invested. But, functionally, the idea of how do you use AI to index all of this information on the web and parse it into these like manageable chunks to then create value to for the market. And they started about how do we go scrape the web, use AI to scrape the web for every public RFP and put it into a marketplace, and then we'll match contractors with these RFPs, and we can handle a lot of the RFP process and like the RFP writing, and we can match them with the right products or projects, and we can make, but it was still murky. It was like, like there's something there, but we don't know exactly. And they've pivoted a couple times, and that's what you have to do, especially now, like more so. 10 years ago, technology, if technology was like, doing 70 down the interstate 10 years ago, well, you're like up in the flight levels doing like 600 knots today. It's just moving so much quicker. And so you can't linger when something is not right. And so anyway, they've been really great about not lingering and pivoting, and we feel really confident this team's going to be able to land on something really exciting because they have the foundation of, these are real founders that are technologists or technical team. They've got the chops and they've got the will to really understand, how do we find the problem that needs to be solved? Like, how do we really dial into that one thing?
No, it was fun. I think I've spent 2 or 3 sessions with him, just, friend to friend, be a soundboard, whatever. And it's really clear, first engagement, they are dogs, right? Like these guys have done their homework. And so that's fun, right? Like I don't necessarily have a lot of time to do like, the soundboard stuff while we're trying to build, but it's also super encouraging and motivating for us while we're trying to build to go like, hey, there are other folks out there adjacent that if we can help spotlight landmines for them, or they can help get us to think about something differently, to your point, kind of that accretive component of what Brickyards is building. So do you see a model for venture on the horizon? I think there's 2 things at play here. One, where software was going 70 and now 600 knots. I think the other thing that's true when you co-founded Bellhops and I co-founded CareSync, the dependency and the value and the expense of engineering talent was like inverted to today. The Cam or the Jamie that might be highly strategic, that might know how to map out a go-to-market and say like, I can go win, but I need you to build me the thing that wins with. We're kind of going into this place where, and I'll say specifically for the public sector, I've been very vocal that I think we're in like the second inning of the third spring training game when it comes to software in the public sector. Mm-hmm. If you're building for the public sector right now, it's kind of 2 choices, like learn COBOL and make that your retirement strategy to go work on mainframes, or like understand how to leverage the tools that are out there. That's going to kind of get us maybe a little bit back to a different version of tech-enabled services. And I mean, away from kind of the big system integrator boondoggles that make the technology itself subservient to the army that can win the RFP, and not fully SaaS, because I'm not sure the public sector, the government entity has the team, the training, the talent, the longevity to go into like that CapEx model of like building a team to manage SaaS. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a play for venture? So if you agree with those things, and tell me if you don't, but if you agree with those things, do you think there's a play for venture, a model? Have you seen anything that sets the stage for an investment that doesn't just view a liquidity event as the only win for the GP and the LP, such that the business that's come into the public sector today that has this ability to generate a really long tail LTV mm-hmm. might kind of fit in that cash cow bucket that might not be in the acquisition bucket? Do you see venture playing there in a way that I don't think it does today?
You know, I kind of doubt it. If I think about, if you just think about the structuring of venture capital, where you have the LPs that are investing in GPs, and the GPs are their job is to go find the companies and make the investments and manage the fund, et cetera.
Yep.
LPs are looking to like tie up capital for a period of time and then get liquid again.
Yeah.
If they're looking for cash flow, or if they're looking for dividends, they're looking in other buckets.
Okay.
But I think that what we're about to see in technology, just in the market period, is the prices of all things are going to be falling to the floor in terms of price or cost of production. And so Bellhops, perfect example. We've probably spent 30 or 40 million bucks in our tech stack over the last 10 years. We could probably build it today for like 1 or 2 million bucks.
Right.
With like, a fifth of the engineers.
And faster.
And faster. And probably, a 10 times, less time. So
yeah.
As that happens, you are going to have companies that don't need to burn as much capital as they need to do in order to produce hyper growth.
Yeah.
And they're also going to be profitable way quicker. And so you have the ability for smaller teams to get really large with great margins way quicker. And so I do think that venture is going to be in for a pretty wild reshuffling over the next decade for a number of reasons. And we've kind of talked about, I don't know if you want to get into the Bitcoin thing, but
yes, that's where we're going next. That's one coming out of ZERP. Like, that's the other thing that I think is really insane and awesome about the audacious bet y'all were making at Brickyard at the time. Because if you put all those factors together, there's COVID, remote work, you're in the middle of ZERP where valuations went insane, mm-hmm. where anybody with cash could be a GP in some regards, or an LP, right? Like, you didn't have to be good. And I think I subscribe to the theory that there's going to be a washout of a lot of folks who have the title of venture capital that were able to do it in the middle of COVID with ZERP, silly money, zero interest. Like, the next decade, you better be really good.
There's certainly that. I mean, absolutely. Yeah, I'll kind of break this down. I think like your growth stage investors that are raising these like $1 billion multi-stage funds, companies aren't going to need to raise a $400, $500, $600 million Series C, D, E, whatever, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to need to raise that much money anymore. And so capital is going to be, crammed into, there's the same amount of capital searching for yield is out there, but it's going to be much more discerning into like who's actually getting the capital, right? As opposed to like this spray and pray thing. But this is part of a larger theme of we've broken our money. And, we may be in an environment today, like if we enter back into a decade like the 70s of persistent high inflation, which I think is very possible, if not probable. there may be venture funds that return 2 times or 3 times capital, in 12 years, but the LPs are actually getting less buying power than they gave the GPs 10 or 12 years prior. So nominally there's a return. And, the venture firms will be like, wow, we're a 3X fund, whatever. Well, the LP actually didn't get as much buying. So we're living in a world that's nominal. People look at their salaries and they say, well, I got I made $100,000 last year, and this year I make 110, and that feels good, right? Well, if with 12% inflation, like, you have less money than you had last year when you made 100 grand, and so the numbers that we are being told with regard to inflation, like the CPI is one, it's a rate. It's not comprehensive inflation. It's a rate. It's just how fast it's accelerating, right? But two, it doesn't include. It's not honest. The CPI, Consumer Price Index, doesn't include energy. It doesn't include housing, and it doesn't include food. Okay. Well, what are your top 3 line items for any American family in terms of budgets? Those 3 things. So, what are we even measuring? Okay.
Before you even get to auto insurance, right? Like, when you take Florida, for example, obviously a lot of great growth happening in COVID. But when you look at property insurance and auto insurance and you incorporate that into inflation, it's like, what is my actual ability to own and accrue assets? If you really think about it, like, for a middle-class American family today, how do they start acquiring and start accruing assets? And I think if we expressed, to your point, the impact of inflation, it's expressly that. It's harder to own a house, it's harder to own a car, and the cost of energy just in my family unit, before we get to the national security concerns on energy and winning the AI battle, that I think is, forefront. So, not to hijack it from you, I love where you're going on the CPI.
Well, it all just comes down to this. Like, okay, let's go back to the year 2000. All right, the last 25 years of the S&P 500's grown at like 7.2%. Okay, what do you think the M2, the growth of our money supply, what has it grown at?
You're going to tell me.
It's literally 7.2%. Okay, and so these are the 500 best companies in the world. Okay, and they are just keeping up with inflation. And this is why. Okay, technology is naturally deflationary. All right, prices fall to the marginal cost of production over time. Companies compete. I figure out how to make a cup for 10 cents less than you. I charge 10 cents less. I take your customers, consumer benefits, and now they're paying 10 cents less for the coffee cup, right? That's like how a free market works with technology. We're getting better at all things every year, right? Yeah. Life should be getting easier every year. Our money should be affording more every year. But what's happening is, because we are in this debt-ridden system, we've got $36.5 trillion in debt, okay? And so the Fed is acting out of its out of self-preservation. They basically have one job: don't default, okay? You got 36 trillion in debt, right? And everybody's like, well, I'm not worried about inflation because we're about to have a productivity miracle with technology. And it's like, that's the worst thing that can happen, because here's why. Okay, we're 4% more productive every year in this, in the U.S. economy, about 4% more productive. Okay, so we get 4% better at doing all things. Okay, well, a 3% inflation rate, the Fed's target of 3% inflation, they're stealing the 4% in price drops that we should be experiencing, plus 3% more. Okay, so it's really a 3% inflation rate when you're growing at 4% is the Fed stealing 7% from you every year. Okay, well, what's about to happen in this next decade is we're about to go from 4% to 6% to 8% to 15%. Okay, more productive, as the cost of things drops faster than in any time in history. And to offset that deflationary gain, because keep in mind, like, every time we are more productive, you're ramming
I make
more.
less.
Well, you're ramming more energy into the same number of units. Okay, so that 36 trillion in debt is now harder to pay off because each dollar is worth more. Okay, so the Fed has to print to offset these gains. And so as this accelerates, this is going to accelerate. And so the debasement of our money is going to literally just go in lockstep. And they're just maintaining, like when life should be getting way easier every single year, we're just maintaining. And so that's this concept of what Bitcoin is, which is a
real quick. I want to hit pause for 1 second because I don't want to lose this piece.
Yep.
I want to go to Bitcoin and AI because you have some really cool stuff on it. But I want to go backwards for a second. When I asked you the question about venture and how it plays in the public sector, you gave the answer that I expected, right? Venture doesn't really set up for investments in companies that are going to do business in the public sector specifically, right? Like a company that only plays in the public sector. For all the reasons you said, right? The pace of growth over here in the commercial, like if you're a founder and you can grow in the commercial market 100 times faster and it's way more straightforward, and you don't have to deal with regulatory capture, and you don't have to deal with RFPs, and you don't have to deal with all the moats that keep you out. Like in the scenario of the cheaper coffee cup, like you can go in the commercial market and sell that really easily. If you want to go to the public sector and sell a coffee cup for $1 less, it's actually harder. Like it is easier to sell a coffee cup for 10 cents less in the commercial world than it is to sell a coffee cup for $1 less in the public sector world. And I think my concern is that without a way to align incentives and fund innovation in the public sector, just like the delta between the Fed and the productivity rates, right? There's going to be this growing chasm where it's going to be harder and harder and harder for innovators to access the public sector. And the public sector, you know, whether it's an agency head, a governor, a mayor, a CIO, they're going to be left to be completely beholden to kind of the big players that like Kodak and Blockbuster are still alive in this world because Netflix can and the iPhone can't happen in that ecosystem. So I'd love for you to chew on that for later. Like that's not a now thing, but that's kind of why I was asking the question of not from a Brickyard's perspective, but from a public sector innovation perspective, where right now so much of that money is dominated by the massive company that's kind of part of that oligarchy, and it makes it really hard for somebody who is doing the productivity gains to enter that space. And that's one of my concerns. That's why I love what Doge is doing to follow the data, follow the dollar.
That's what I was going to say. Like, look, like the public market or the government should be just as discerning, if not more discerning, as the consumer in the public market.
Yes.
Right? Like they should be chasing.
But one of them operates on a P&L. Like what I tell people all the time, like when somebody goes like, how come this big IT project gets canceled in 2 quarters in the commercial world, but it goes 5 years in the public sector?
Sure.
There's a P&L over here that's governing. And I think you would say, and I would agree, as a taxpayer, the government should be running a P&L. There should be a scorecard. There should be something that's like, why do I have 500 change orders?
Sure. Well, I think that's why we're going department by department by department in
by line item, right? Like I love it.
Right? Like people do not understand that it's not like the government just has like a cornucopia that just, like produces value. No, we produce the value.
That's right.
And then we pay taxes. And then the government prints money at their discretion. And there's no checks and balances as to where that money goes. And so the capital allocation in the free market is like we're the best capital allocators there are because we have kids that we have to, put food on the table every night. Like if I make a bet on something and it returns less to me than I put in, then like I just hurt my kids, right? Like the government has none of that, and that's why we're seeing Yeah, the problem is we have to start the government has to start running like a family that is trying to take care of its children, and
Dude, I
it's not
love
doing
that you
that.
said that. I heard Howard Lutnick recently was talking. I didn't know this. I don't know if you know this, that GDP actually incorporates government spending. So when the government tells us what GDP is, it actually factors in how much money government spent.
That that that's absolutely asinine
Isn't
crazy.
that insane?
I'm finding out new stuff like this. I feel like every week, and it's unfathomable what how bad the rot has become. Like we are being lied to. And it's not
Eh,
like everyone in the government's evil. It's just this little lie is turned into this big and then this big and this big and this big. And everybody that's new that's coming into this thing, it's like, well, this is just how it's done. And so it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And now, we're in a really pivotal
do,
moment.
do you want to make a public wager here? And I know you won't make this wager. I I would be willing to bet, and when Lutnick was talking about this, he actually kind of teased it, that if you look at government spending prior to an election, they dump spending so that they can say GDP is growing. And then look at the next 2 quarters, and it's like, well, we've run all the money out. And so to your point, that what made me think about that, Cam, is I love when you talk about like thinking about our kids, is like the conversation in DC has always been, well, if you want to touch entitlement reforms, you're going to take Medicare away from old people, you're going to take healthcare away from kids, rather than actually looking at the amount of rot and saying like, hey, we're actually lying to people. And what if we looked at what is spent before, like, I think it's crazy to think that we can't clean up line by line in agencies and actually preserve the intended benefit better
Yeah.
than we can when GDP doesn't even require production. It's just spending.
We're talking, and I don't know how much time we like. I don't want to like go too much
I
down
don't
this
care.
path,
We keep going. Well,
but we're talking about the symptoms. Like
yes.
everybody is talking about the symptoms. The
What's the
symptoms.
disease? What's the disease in your mind? Because I think this takes you to where you were going to go on Bitcoin in a way that I think is really interesting. And I don't want to lead you that way, but let's dive on the disease.
It's creating money out of thin air, which is nothing other than theft.
It's a lie
It's
and theft.
it's theft. Like
Yeah.
the creation of money is theft. And so
Why? Why? Break that down in a way my mom would understand. Like if the Fed prints money, because I don't think you're saying it's metaphorical theft or arbitrary theft. I think
no.
you're saying it is literal theft of the value that John and Beverly Grant have.
Well, okay. So like taxes, okay, you have to vote for politicians to come in and then like they have to vote in Congress on behalf of their constituents like yes, we want these tax hikes or whatever. Like in order to tax more, the elected officials in our government have to propose legislation to raise taxes, okay? And this is like this agreed upon thing, okay? And then obviously there's a lot of like trickery that happens there, and there's a lot of ways that you can get, but for the most part, you know, indirectly, we elect people that we think are going to raise taxes or lower taxes, right? Um, I mean, is that
No, I think you're there, but I also think the other thing that doesn't get talked about enough, and this was fascinating to me, to kind of be in the locker room of the legislature for a decade. We also elect them to spend more.
yes, but let me just go back. Basically, what I'm saying is like taxes are like they they are taking from us, but they're at least doing us the honor of telling us that they're taking from us.
Agree. I like where you're going. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And so what all inflation is like let's say I have 3 cups here. Okay. Let's use 2020 COVID. All right. There's 3 cups on the table and they're all full of water. All right. Well, COVID happened and we decided that we're going to print 40% of every dollar that's ever been in circulation. Okay. So we put 2 more cups on the table. All right. Were those cups full? No. There was nothing in the cup until it touched the table. And then all of a sudden, the second it touched the table, now I have 5 cups that are like 80% full. Okay. And so
Because there's no more water, to your point. Like for this example, there's no more water. There's just more cups.
there's no value that's created when you add a zero on a ledger. Okay. There's no
Right.
value to the account. There's no more goods or services that have been provided there. You're just diluting the money. It's like, hey, I
Yeah.
have a sweet tea. This tastes great. And then you pour some water in it. It's like, this doesn't taste as good, right? That's buying power. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when unelected people can decide to print, dilute all of us by 40%, my dad that's been saving for decades and decades, for retirement, okay? Well, now his money is going, functionally, it's going to go 40% less far, okay? And it's going to take a while for that to spread through through the market and for that to be realized. The creation of money is just purely theft. So if you just think about all, you have power production plants. Like think of like a nuclear power plant, all right? And it's kicking off megawatts, all right? Well, those are our companies that are creating better goods and services every year. They're like creating new stuff, okay? And it's great, all right? Well, in order for a civilization to function, you have to have a fungible money that you can trade for goods and services in the economy, okay? And so these are like batteries over here, all right? And so all of a sudden you've got all these power plants kicking off money and they're stuffing them into these batteries, all right? And the batteries are what we use to do our life every day. Well, if the government just keeps throwing more batteries on this side, the production plants aren't producing more electricity. There's just more batteries, that electricity is just being spread out across more batteries. And so the concept of what Bitcoin is a totally fixed supply of money that's infinitely divisible, which is not dilutive. You can just divide it infinitely. So functionally, what needs to happen is everything in the world is downstream of money, right? And if the money's corrupted at the top, it corrupts everything else all the way down the stack. And so what's happening is we have too much debt. In order to remain solvent, we have to continue printing debt. It's not just a problem in the U.S. It's a problem in every government on earth. These central banks are printing money. The USD is the best fiat money on earth. It's the Titanic, okay? But we all know it's sinking. We can buy less and less every year. We know it's sinking. But we're not going to jump ship into the icy waters to go to the Russian ruble. They're further in the water than we are. And we're not going to jump ship and we're not swimming over the Chinese yuan. We're just going to sit here on the Titanic and we're going to listen to the dude play the violin. And we're just going to be like, I hope somebody comes, but like life's not that bad. Like we're on the Titanic, like we got food and stuff. Well, what happened is we had a boat that just pulled right up next to the Titanic 10 years ago or 15 years ago when the Bitcoin white paper was written. And it's a verifiably indestructible boat, okay? And you have a few people that are jumping ship, and now we're having institutions and BlackRock and governments, and we're having your first players swim out. They're leaving the dollar. They're swimming out to this completely isolated system, monetary system. And they're climbing into the presidential suites over there, okay? Well, the Titanic is taking on too much water. We're never going to patch the hole. The 36 trillion in debt that we have is only going to get worse. We're refinancing 9 trillion of our money this year into higher rates. There's no way to earn our way out of this because on top of the 36 trillion, we have another 100 trillion of unfunded liabilities in Social Security, Medicare, et cetera. Like there's no way out of this. And so this is actually a good thing because what needs to happen is there needs to be a separation of money and state. Obviously, the state needs to be able to take tax and they need to be able to function on behalf of their constituents. But their ability to print money is nothing but theft from us. So they tax us and then they're like stabbing us in the ribs kind of behind our back. When they printed 40% every dollar in circulation after COVID, well, they gave us about $1.5 trillion back. but then they took 5.5 trillion of it, and then they did whatever they wanted with it.
Right.
Right. And so that was theft. They stole that from us. Anybody that held money, saved money, had to pay for that. And we're going to pay for that with inflation. And
do
so
you real quick, do you think that the I don't know what the right question is here, but like at the same time the market was ripping. And so it's almost like there's this charade to cover up the theft that says, again, to that nominal, when you were talking about just the growth in productivity, if we said like the growth of the asset in the way of commodities that are publicly traded, it's almost like the American public doesn't necessarily realize that sometimes the market ripping is actually just another nominal kind of mask over their actual buying power.
Well, of course, because there was a flight to preserve purchasing power. And so if you knew that inflation was coming, if you knew the money was being debased, well, you're going to hold assets, right? It's the people that can't hold assets that are getting the most screwed here.
And so preach.
And so, yeah, like when you know your money is being devalued, you have to go find yield to offset the debasement of the money that you're holding. You're not going to, our parents, for example, like when we were in high school, I guarantee you, our parents had savings accounts. They had cash in a savings account. Do you have a savings account? No.
Hardly.
Do I have a savings account? No. Do our parents have savings? No. You're fully allocated into the market, and you may have maybe a little emergency fund.
Yep.
We've killed saving, and so the time preference,
and the incentive to save, by the way.
Sure.
Which is crazy. Sorry.
Well, there is no incentive to saving because you're just going to lose 7 to 10% of your money every year if you do that. Yeah. And so, that's the problem. Everything is downstream of a broken money. And what Bitcoin just represents is a fixed monetary policy that's fair, that everybody ascribes to, but nobody can change. Okay? And so there's no more of this, if you can't control the issuance of money, you cannot become use this abstract power projection of we're the government, so we can do this thing, and then we're going to steal this your buying power from you because it's if we don't do it, then we're going to go through an economic collapse or something.
So I think what's interesting, and I don't know if you agree with this. I'm curious. You talked about the Bellhops examples, right? Like you're getting the cease and desist, and then you get served. The fights against rideshare and airports. The regulatory capture. One of the things I used to do kind of a keynote around during those days was the difference between capitalism and capitalism, one with an A and one with an O, right? Like actual capitalism and a free market that allows the taxi cab owner to be disrupted, or allows the hotel to be disrupted, or allows U-Haul to be disrupted in kind of a caveat emptor, Milton Friedman, Frederick Bastiat school of thought that I'll die on the hill defending. Like that capitalism is really just free enterprise that incentivizes Cam to take on, and the Bellhops team to take on something that's kind of like fine. I think in the crypto space, what's really interesting is we're kind of seeing the capitalism with an O, which is a playbook that regulatory capture, whatever you want to call it, where companies are actually going to Capitol Hill, whether in DC or around the country, to advocate for protectionist policies that arbitrarily raise rates and prevent against competition, which I think when you look at CPI or GDP, those things, regulatory capture has I think an incalculable impact on those numbers that it's almost like a ghost you can't find. And it feels like we're at this inflection point in the crypto space broadly when you have a president that shows up at crypto conferences, when you have David Sachs joining the administration, when you have Byron Donalds coming out talking about how we should, the notion of a sovereign wealth fund or the ability to accrue these assets, it does feel like we're starting to have elected officials in a prominent position where the first 4 or 5 years of that rideshare, I couldn't even get the rideshare legislation agenda'd in a Republican, supposedly free enterprise legislature. Meaning I couldn't even get my bill to have a hearing from a Republican chairman because the entrenched interest were so great. It feels like we're starting to see some inertia in the crypto space where the banks who have, I think, and you know this way better than I do, my sense from the cheap seats is that the banks have been very anti-crypto for a while for obvious reasons. It feels like they're, now stable coins and some of the things that are happening, it feels like the tide is turning a little bit. And if I were to sum up at least my experience with rideshare, short-term vacation rentals, those tech-enabled services taking on entrenched industries, there was a tipping point where the market finally won, expressed by the consumer. The consumer said, I want Bellhops, not U-Haul. The consumer said, I want Uber, not a taxi, an Airbnb or a Vrbo. Do you feel like we're at that? Where do you have us on the spectrum with crypto in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this started with the institutions coming with the regulatory clarity around allowing for these big money managers to launch their ETFs. Yeah. And so that was a major domino that fell, which effectively
What's an ETF for folks that don't know what's an ETF?
It's an exchange traded fund. It's basically there's a bunch of Bitcoin ETFs now. BlackRock has one, Fidelity has one, et cetera. And you can buy it like a stock, and it tracks the price appreciation of Bitcoin. So like you give them 100 grand, they buy 100 grand worth of Bitcoin, they hold the Bitcoin. You go up, you ride the price, fluctuation with that Bitcoin that they bought on your behalf. And then when you want to cash out, you're not getting Bitcoin back, you're getting fiat back, but you get to you get to participate in the price appreciation. And so it's just an easy way. You don't have to custody it. It's just an easy way for people to get into Bitcoin. But you have these large, funds that are actually buying Bitcoin with their clients' money, which is a pretty good deal for them. But
they basically oppose it until they can monetize it, right? Like it's that same playbook every 100%. Time for the big institution, right? Like 100%. oppose it, and then figure out how they can monetize it. And once they realize that the growth of the monetization is better than the loss created by competition, all of a sudden they're on team innovation.
Sure. And you talk to your banks. Like I bank with a few like boutique smaller banks, that, a year ago I asked them, for like an unsecured line of credit for something. And I tried to use, Bitcoin, and they were like, we can't even look at Bitcoin as being an asset. We actually have to look at it like a liability. Okay. Well, 2 months ago, SAB 121 was passed, where banks don't, banks can now custody Bitcoin. Okay. And so that the whole tide is turning. Whereas before, if you wanted to hold 100 million in Bitcoin, you had to hold 100 million in cash equivalents as like collateral. Okay. Yeah. So like just to even hold 100 million in Bitcoin, you had to also tie up 100 million versus, with U.S. Treasury. Right. So, all right, well, that's gone. Now these banks can actually custody Bitcoin directly. This is a massive deal. And what that enables is now I had a conversation with the same bank, and they came back and they were like, hey, we can totally recognize Bitcoin as a personal asset now. And it's like, okay, well, it just the one regulation needed to change, and now all these banks are like, we want to be we want to be the first bank in the state to custody Bitcoin. So it's all.
And by the way, the Bankers Association metaphorically was showing up in the Capitol lobbying legislators saying Bitcoin's the devil until a regulation changes, right? And it's not a knock on those associations. Like I always told people in the Capitol, the rule of association was the most powerful rule in the Capitol, because the associations are actually not vested in good policy. They're vested in the most advantageous policy.
Yep.
And so those associations are showing up lobbying you, and it's like, dude, nothing changed about Bitcoin from 2 months and a
Nope.
day ago. Nothing about the technology, nothing about the value to the stakeholder, nothing about the impact to the industry. The only thing that changed was the impact to your institution's ability to leverage that. And it's why I think regulatory capture is just this plague. So I want to ask you one more question that is going to take us back to the top on something, because there was something I wanted to ask you that I didn't ask you, and it'll tie the bow, I think, really nicely to the public sector. But in general, you made I don't know you, but you've talked about it. Your team, Bellhops, made a decision. And I think if I was to sum up our conversation today, one of the things I would tell the digital service in our all hands, I would use it as our closeout slide. Would the constituent, the taxpayer, do business with us if they had a choice? Right? Like, government has guns and badges, which are really compelling ways to force you to do business with them. And customer constituent experience is becoming a bit of a trend in the public sector, where people are like, hey, like, actual design matters, clicks, workflows. Like, Cam, when he deals with a commercial entity, gets an experience for a digital transaction that's radically different. And there's this, I think, plague, and I think it goes to kind of what, is happening. We'll just lump it all into Doge, where it's like, hey, we should be looking at how to create growth. We should also be looking at how to curtail spending and give us some little narrow channel out of this disastrous financial crisis that the country finds itself in. But I want to go to just that culture of seeing Cam and his family when making monetary decisions. I want to take it to the programmatic side. I want to land the plane here. We're going to get to our roundup of some fun stuff. Tell us about how Bellhops decided to get rid of the 5-star customer review system. What was behind it? Like, how did that impact the culture, both of the Bellhops team, but how did it also give a lot more transparency and value to the Bellhops customer?
Yeah.
I've never asked you about this. I'm fascinated by it from the little bit I've seen on the outside.
Yeah, this was like a 18-month long obsession of mine.
Which is a normal length of obsession for Cam, by the way. Like, that's exactly. Like par.
This is one of those like things that I really hyper focused on. So the problem in Bellhops is we have algorithms that are assigning moving crews to jobs based on like the size of the job, where the job is, all that stuff. Okay. And we're also collecting a lot of performance data from each of our movers. Their on-time rate, their damage rate, their reviews that they're getting from their fellow Bellhops, the reviews that they're getting from their customers, et cetera. And actually making sense of like who a great Bellhop is pretty difficult when you're only collecting a 5-star review. And I have this like deeply seated belief that the 5-star review system is just a marketing thing. It was developed because people want to say, oh, we're a 5-star company, or we're 4.7 stars, or 4.8. It's about driving like customer demand. But if you're actually trying to give data to an algorithm that is trying to understand who is actually a top 10% bellhop, or a top 25% bellhop, or a 50%er, or a bottom 10% bellhop, the difference between a great bellhop and a bellhop that we would need to fire and get off the platform was like a 4.7 was like a great bellhop, and a 4.61 was like a really bad bellhop. And so you can't give that to an algorithm and say, hey, like there's not enough information in there for you to actually parse out who is really great, who is your world-class, bellhop versus like who does somebody that needs to get off the platform. And so we did a massive deep dive, and we discovered, like, we started asking the question with our bellhops, like, do you like working with Jamie? Yes or no, right? Or like, would you work with Jamie again? Yes or no? Or like, we tried to word it a bunch of different ways. Well, 98% of our bellhops said yes. And we're like, I know that's not true. Like, why is that happening? And so we interviewed, like a couple hundred bellhops, And it was guilt and fear. Guilt, I don't want to be the reason Jamie doesn't make rent next month. And fear, I don't want Jamie to find out that I gave him a bad review and then show up on a move with him and then, something happened or whatever. All right. And so we shifted to this idea of high fives. And so this was for internal reviews. Okay. So every bellhop after every job would review each other. Okay. And you basically, in increments of one, like you'd have to take your phone and go ding, 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 ding. And it was capped at 25 or 30, high fives. But if you wanted to give a 25 high five rating to, Jamie, you had to sit there.
There was friction. There's friction in that.
It was harder to give a better review. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we rolled this out, and like literally overnight, it pulled out the distribution in a perfect bell curve. And, our bottom, 5% bellhops would get like 2.3 claps or high fives. And our tops would get like 14 and a half high fives. And so that was actually data that we could feed into our algorithms to know, like, this is a 12.5 bellhop. Like, we need to give him bigger jobs, better jobs, higher paying jobs, et cetera. This is a 6. Okay, we need to load him up with like more tutorials on, his on time rate's good and his this and this, but like, he's kind of right in the middle of other bellhops liking him. And anyway, and so it solved the guilt and fear piece because, it was getting what we needed through the presence of positives as opposed to the like absence of negatives, right?
Dude, I love that for a lot of reasons. I thought it's funny because when you said that the 5-star rating was really a marketing play, and I completely agree with the reason you gave, but I actually thought you were going to go somewhere else. Because I think it's two things. One, I do think, especially in the SEO world and, just all the reasons why marketing, we're a 4.8, 4.9, 5-star, whatever it is. The second thing, I think it's actually sometimes a marketing play to give the false or surface level impression that I care about my customer. Right? Like
Sure.
Every time I deal with Delta and call the desk and get the press 1 or press 5, like, to your point, like, it's just easier to press 5. It's kind of 5s or 1s, right? Like somebody has to be, I don't know if I've ever given a 3, it's like,
it's totally binary. That's the thing.
Yes.
I mean, I should have gotten to this, but like the 5-star review is totally binary. It's like like any experience I've ever had is a 5 unless it was god awful.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you're never giving a spectrum. You're never like, it was a 3. Right? It's a 5 unless it was absolutely horrible, and then it was a 1. So it might as well be 0 or 1. Right?
Yes.
And you can't actually do anything with that data. And so, being able to
sorry, Cam. The do anything that I think you touched on is also huge, right? So like when you think about, I was blown away. I had about 300 employees until we outsourced a data center, but I was blown away at how good the talent was. Like there's this notion that like government workers are lazy and dumb and can't do anything else. And I found that to be largely untrue. There's certainly stereotypes are real for a reason, and there's the bad examples, and you kind of find them and root them out. But those mission-driven people that are there to try and like it was interesting to me, like whether it was COVID or Hurricane Ian response, like all of the kind of rapid response stuff we did, how excited the team got at like the metrics and being able to see it go. They really do want to do a good job. And I think when you're an executive and you don't have data that helps you do the personnel development at like a employee specific level, right? Like it's not just, am I putting a good product out for my constituent or my customer? It's also like, how am I getting data that helps me identify somebody that might be on the edge of not making it in this job or having a ton of potential that just needs some growth, discipleship, mentorship to go like, hey, you really have the ability to go to the next level, but here's what's holding you back. And I think that's something really interesting that you touched on, that it wasn't just the data for like the quality assurance. Sure, I'm sure that was a major motivation, but it was also just the workforce and personnel development side that I think you're blind to at the scale y'all are playing on unless you do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right, let's run through. We call it the Roundup. I told you these are all impromptu. If there was one guest that was made for this, it's Cam Doody. So let's kick off with the one piece of advice, like the one that shaped your career more than anything else, and who gets the credit?
I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier in this, in the podcast, but like having strong convictions and holding on to them loosely is, I have a lot of strong convictions, like all day, every day.
We've now had the understatement of the episode.
But like you have to know when to let go of these things. Like when new information is presented that debunks some conviction that you had, you have to reevaluate. And I think that's something that most people have a really hard time doing.
Yeah.
But it's important to have strong convictions. It's not like just go through life lukewarm. Like that's not it. It's like you have to vigorously approach life with the information that you have, and until you get a piece of information that debunks it. And then the second that happens, you need to burn the thing to the ground and find redefine whatever that conviction is, and then continue forward.
We love to say, or my team is sick of me saying, Monday and Friday can both be true and mutually exclusive because Wednesday happened. That doesn't mean we're right? Like all of a sudden something happened on Wednesday that makes everything about our hypothesis and assumptions and beliefs and even the data from Monday fundamentally irrelevant. And now it's like, okay, I love that you called out, don't weaken the conviction, don't get soft, maintain the strength, but have the curiosity and the intellectual honesty to go, okay, it's changed because we were wrong. It's changed because we have new information. It's changed for any number of reasons. Let's maintain. I love that both of those are important to you. If you have, I mean, not to like overshare, but Cam and I go back to a level. We met when Cam was actually in high school, visiting Auburn, sleeping on my couch because his brother was one of my best friends in college. Cam and I, it would be fair to say, probably in our career, have battled the ability to focus until we get hyper-focused. Cam, if you have one kind of productivity hack or framework that guys like us have to battle, like all these distractions and figure out what to dive into, if you have one productivity hack or one safeguard framework to help you lock in when you're locked in on the 5-star, what is that thing?
Adderall. Just kidding.
Some things never change. Some things never change.
I'm joking.
Kinda.
Yeah, kind of. That's a whole different story. I was horribly over medicated all through my childhood. I had
open invitation. I want to do a repeat with you on that because we share that.
Okay. Yes, I'd love to. I don't know. I think it just depends I think it's just different for everybody. You just have to decide what you want out of each day. And it's way easier to, roll into each day and just find time where you're just scrolling on your phone and, you're not living with vigor. You're not very intentional because there's so much that you can spend your time doing that isn't actually productive. I think if you're able to have an idea, even if it's just a 1-minute thought you have on your way into work, like what am I actually doing today?
Yeah.
and you can kind of think back to that, throughout the day, and the next day it changes to something totally different. I think that's been very helpful for me.
I've dug on and hat tip to a buddy of mine, Jordan Rayner, the concept of open loops. And I guess neurologically, our brains continue spinning if we don't take that thought and put it somewhere reliable. I struggle to do it well, but like how to capture those open loops, put them in a system, and try and go. I think I know the answer to this one, Cam. I'm not going to lead you too much. If you want to completely unplug, like you are just like want to get to the place where your brain, the world, it shuts off and you're just in that moment, what is that thing you're doing?
I fly airplanes. It's a cathartic thing for me. That is, I can't be on my phone. You're just locked in, and fishing. Like those two are, or even like, I just love being in the outdoors, whether it's hunting or fishing or
Yeah.
spearfishing, or I like being on a mission where I am not even tempted to pick up, you know, any kind of distraction.
So people
And in
know,
those
like,
moments, go ahead.
no, keep going, keep going.
In those moments, you're just fully present. And it's in those moments when that I'm fully present that um, I'm I don't have any worries or thoughts of that. I just like to lock in. I guess that's
Yeah.
part of, yeah.
No, I don't even know if you know this, but I've said for, I don't know, 20 years now, like you'll find me one day on a ranch in Montana. And that is Chris and Cam Doody's influence on my life. Like I knew that fly fishing would be one of those. I love, I love the content you put out. I love when I get to be on the Snake or Madison sending you pictures, visiting out there. But literally, you and Chris are Chris is the reason I started fly fishing, and my love for Montana and being out west is a Doody impact in my life. Speaking of that, one book and one band that you're convinced the world needs to know about.
A band. I actually heard this band like 3 days ago, and I'd never heard of him before. And I was like, "How has this guy been hidden under a rock?"
This is why
Sean
this question exists.
Sean McConnell.
Don't know him.
Yeah, I mean he's great. There's a song called "Shaky Bridges." That's I'm on to him hot right now. And then a book. I think on this topic, I've said this a lot, but there's a book called Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And it's just an absolutely amazing book for anybody that wants to take on starting a company and have like a very realistic view about what it entails. And it's scary. You read it and you get scared. And I think if you can make it through Hard Thing About Hard Things and still want to do what you're about to do, you absolutely should do it. But if that book can scare you off, you probably never should. And in both cases, you'll be better off.
Yeah, I love that. Most people get a pick 'em on this one. You get both because you're Cam Doody. I want to know the wildest thing you've ever done to impress someone, and did it work?
Oh my gosh. Well, I dropped a volleyball out of an airplane for the beta volleyball tournament.
I was about to say, like, most people would struggle with this one because they're like, I can't come up with one. You're struggling because there's like an infinity list. Also, it would be criminal not to give a shout out to the Dirty Governors while we have a Doody brother here. Speaking of our college days, but one band that people should dive into. All right. Do you have a controversial take, like your hottest take that you're convinced shouldn't be controversial?
Yeah, I mean it's Bitcoin. We did not get to go deep enough on the subject, but I think it's the most important technology in the history of mankind, and it's equally as important as AI. And when I just said it's the most important and equally important, Bitcoin and AI are the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin, and people don't understand that yet. And it's infinite productivity of AI and the absolute scarcity of money. And those two things are human flourishing. And study Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yes, I love it, and we're going to do that. All right. Landing the plane here. We got 2 left. This one I'm excited to ask you because I don't have to give context to this. If Brickyard played your walk-up song every time you showed up at the office, and you get to pick your walk-up song.
Nelly, Batter Up.
Love it. Love it. All right. And our last question, we let every guest leave a question for the next guest without knowing who they are. We had 2 guests together on the last one, and so I'm gonna merge these because they kind of run together. If there's something in your business experience you regret, what is it? And if there's something you will regret not doing if you don't do, what is it?
I don't think there's anything that I regret. I think that's unproductive to even think about, like regrets. I think we all make the best decisions that we can make with the information that we have at the time. And if you're fearlessly making, if your regrets would be not making the hard decisions that you knew you needed to make. That's the regret.
Yeah.
Making a bad decision, I won't be regretful to make, for any bad decisions that I've made, because I tried to make the right decisions. But if there was a right decision that I didn't make because it was going to be hard, that would be a regret. And then what was the other one?
If you don't do it, what are you going to regret? Like, what is something that you're looking at going like, man, is there something that if you don't do in the future, you're going to regret not doing in the future? It's kind of funny that somebody left these for you because you're not a regret guy, and I think this one's actually tough because you kind of do it all. Like you see it, do it, see it, do it.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that.
All right, then let's take you to your question you want to leave for the next guest.
All right, this is my favorite question at like dinner parties, and you kind of asked it in like 3 questions ago, but it's really great. It's really special when you have a group of people around a table, and it's always just such a thought-provoking question for me. What is one thing that you know for sure that you don't think that I know?
Like you've got to know it's a certainty, and you're pretty sure that I don't know it.
Yes.
Can you give us are there a memorable answer? Are there memorable answers to that? Because I can see that being 1, you at the dinner party, and 2, getting some pretty wild responses.
It functionally, it makes everybody respond with like their highest conviction thing that they don't feel like they can talk about normally.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when you come back, yes, Bitcoin. 2, I love the intersection of the way you go about things. I teach it from a jury selection perspective, like coming out of like you can't ask the jury, are you liberal or conservative? You can't ask them, do you like cops or not like cops? But you can ask them questions to kind of get. I love those kind of questions that are like, tell me about yourself without me having to ask you, tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
I love that. All right, Cam, dude, this has been everything I hoped it to be. I told everybody at the top that we would go all over the place. Let's do it again whenever you want. Because I think you gave us absolute gold on a couple fronts. We're going to we'll follow up with you if folks want to catch up. JustLayBrick.com is a really special place and a really special team. Cam, dude, I know you have companies that you're helping in the trenches at Brickyard right now. So for you to take this time and come spend it with us, I can't thank you enough, brother.
Hey, I'll do it anytime. I'll try to be less scattered next time.
Let's not make promises that neither of us can keep.
Thanks, Jamie.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
See ya.